Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 132. My guest in this episode is Janet Sandberg, and Janet is a suicide awareness and mental health advocate, also host of the Phoenix Wisdom podcast, where people who have experienced suicidal ideation share their stories and transform and triumph in order to help others still in the darkness feel less alone and find the hope they need to keep going. And as you just heard, we will be discussing mental health and suicide specifically. And so if this is a sensitive matter for you, I might ask you to be forewarned that we'll be discussing that, although we're discussing it in a matter to help folks. So I hope you understand that that's our intention there. And it was a pleasure speaking with Janet. I will have contact information in the show notes or the description field. And I very much appreciate you all being here, especially my subscribers. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. This is my first upload for 2025, so I wish all of us a good year. And again, thank you so much for being here. I'd like to welcome Janet Sandberg to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm looking forward to a conversation that frankly touches on some things that could be sensitive. So I'll say to the audience that we're going to be unpacking some ideas that are sensitive. And so I don't want to say anything drastic like trigger warning or anything like that. But, I just want to let you all know that we're going to be covering some things, but always in a good light, always in the means to better our understanding of mental health and some of the things that all of us go through, all of us have been through. So, Janet, welcome. I hope that was a good, a good
Thank you. Yeah.
disclaimer. You can add disclaimers too if you want. But
No,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
all good. All
Yeah,
good.
and my audience is mature, at least the subscribership, and I've had other folks on talking about the things that we're going to cover. So yeah, I don't think there's going to be any surprises here, but I just want to prompt people, and I'll say that also in the introduction. But in speaking of the audience, welcome to you all. I appreciate your attendance and your being here with Janet and myself. And so what I would like to do to get kicked off is we'll stay very traditional, and I want to maybe ask you what you would like to share about your background and what brought you to where you are now and the work that you do. And let's start there, and then we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
Oh, well, that's a big nut to crack.
Yeah, whatever, like I said, whatever you think contextually is good for
there,
where we're going to head.
yeah, there's been a lot of stuff that has brought me to where I am now. And I think I'm just coming down with a cold. So
Oh,
if I get a little froggy or scratchy or whatever, forgive me. Um, yeah, the last I don't know, 15 years or so were just sort of a series of chronic traumas um, that affected me in bigger and more ways than I even knew at the time. You know, when you're in it, you're just trying to get through it. And it's not until afterwards where you're like, oh my God, that was really hard. But they overlapped and there were just so many of them. And it took me a long, long time and I, worked on myself throughout, but hindsight is always 2020, right? And you look back and you're just like, whoa, I, that was, I did a lot. That was a lot. Um, and I've always been a helper. And so I have taken all of this stuff that I went through and I've turned it around to try to help others who are going through the same thing. And that's always been sort of my modus operandi, no matter what I was doing, whether it was my healing work, I'm an energy healer, um, whether it was that, whether it was, being a mom. I was a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. And and now it's my podcast and going deeper into the mental health field, also professionally, hopefully. So it's just, everything is, for me, it's all about taking what I've been through and what I've lived through and using that to help other people.
mhm. One thing I want to acknowledge in what you just said is that you're what I would imagine like a psycho-emotional alchemy going on, that you converted uh, adverse times, traumatic times, life, really, or whatever you want to call it, you know, hitting you in the heart, and that you could convert that into an empowerment or into a means to want to help others. And that's laudable that we can come through that, because some people, through no fault of their own, get broken, or they become cynical,
Mhm.
or whatever, and that you can come through these situations, and on the other end of the coming out of the crucible, that you're, oh my gosh, I'm, highly motivated to,
Yeah, well,
help
some of
others
that
along.
stems from, me feeling really alone and not having any resources for some of the situations I was in,
Okay.
or having really great resources and being super grateful that they were there. It's
Mhm.
like there was no middle ground. It was either like I had something that was really great and I wanted to make sure that that was there for other people, or not having it and wishing it was there. So now I'm creating those things, I hope,
Okay.
for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, again, any good faith effort, any means to say, hey, I've walked that path, and I've felt those emotions, and I've been through that, in its own right, if it's delivered to the right ears and the right person at the right time, perhaps, or the right
Yeah.
span of time, that, yeah, that is so, again, alchemical. It's just, it really, because I think as humans, we tend to very quickly connect in what is, I've heard described, that empathy is a cognitive faculty, but then one extension from that is that empathy then becomes compassionate, then becomes a means to assist in the healing process and be there present for someone. So yeah, I just that in itself is a blessing, to be able to recognize that you have the ability, now that you've been through it, that you shouldn't feel obliged, but that you feel motivated, and this is what a path you want to walk, and take care of that is, it's great that we can recognize that when that happens.
Hmm.
And I'm sure I'm covering a lot of folks that do that. And I guess there are people who go maybe and become a psychologist, and maybe they did have a reasonably good life. And I think that's also important, to have a perspective of a life that's not full of injury and not full of trauma,
Yeah.
to also lend that. So it's a team effort.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh, so let's talk about, in the course of trauma recovery, trauma reframing, and bringing yourself forward to a person that is, again, functional and capable and willing to help someone. What are the tools in your toolbox? You said you're furthering yourself with regard to, are you formalizing a degree, or what are you doing with, you know, certifications or anything like that? Are you aiming towards something, or are you in the
So
process of?
I'm in the process. So I'm applying to grad school,
Oh, cool.
um, to become a licensed professional counselor,
Nice,
mental
nice.
health therapist, you know,
Yeah.
um, do that as my day job to really help people.
Uh-huh.
Um, the certifications I already have are more on the holistic side of things. So
Okay.
I'm a Reiki master teacher, I'm a soulful life coach. So I've been helping people for the last 13, 14 years,
Mm-hmm.
just in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
physically, emotionally, spiritually, in so many ways, because everything is all connected,
Mm-hmm.
body, mind, spirit. You can't separate any of those things. um but I just felt that it was time to um to step it up a notch, and do something that was more tangible, for people, and just the state of the world at the moment. And we are going through a mental health crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and we need more professionals out there. So I figured I'd try to be one of them, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I will be.
Yeah. Well, I'm playing armchair coach here, but even where you are right now and what you do, and again, given your history and your experience, that if let's just say you weren't going to become a postgraduate certified therapist, that what you bring to bear for people, just by way of experience, I think is great, and that you're focused on again, using that as a utility or a means to have insights into where somebody is, but also to share anecdotally with someone that, hey, I was in your shoes. I walked that walk, and this is what I did, and I'm not leading you, and I'm not, trying to be prescriptive here. But if it helps you in any way to know that you're not alone on this journey, and you haven't,
Mhm.
you're not, taking up your cross by yourself here in this particular trauma or this particular incident. So, but the fact that you are going to certify, I think, we are a society that loves the letters at the end of our names, and all the things, and I
Well,
don't say that's
particularly insurance loves the letters after.
yeah, that too. But I think
So
it gives somebody a set.
I can help more people if they can go through their insurance. Like you
Oh
got to
yeah.
work with the system that's there, right? Like I don't agree with how structured it is,
Hmm.
but that's kind of where we're at, is that people will kind of only do things that is paid for by insurance.
Hmm.
And the energy healing and the coaching that I do, I'm really good at it, but you have to pay out of pocket for that.
Yeah.
And most people are not in a place financially, especially these days,
Hmm.
to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. And as well, though, that I think people, when they see certification or some sort of authority, that opens up the consensual frame a little bit in the interaction with someone, and they say, okay, this person is certified in X, or whatever.
yeah.
And I think that would allow people to then open that trust and the consent and more reciprocal
Yes.
opening of, yeah, trust, and like, oh, okay, you've, yada yada, and it does seem, it's I see both sides. It's like you're saying, it's a formality. Obviously the education will benefit you as well as your clients or patients, but yeah, it's an interesting place we put ourselves as persons in this world, but nonetheless, I think it's an excellent move to do that. Like you said, for the reality of the market system and people's ability to spend money to heal themselves, which just seems a little weird, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's where we are. And but let's see. Let's zero in on it. We've talked about trauma. We've talked about, a history. But so in your working with people, when you become a licensed clinician or whatever the moniker would be, um, is there a bracket and an area of focus that you're going to be working with specifically?
Um, I don't know yet.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of my work right now and through my podcast is suicide prevention,
Hmm.
but I've lived through grief. I lost my sister when we were in our 40s, and
Hmm.
there's not a lot out there on sibling grief,
Hmm.
especially midlife sibling grief. Like
Okay.
it's kind of like kids who lose their siblings in a terrible accident, or like, when you're older and you just expect your siblings to pass.
Hmm.
But that midlife situation, there's not a lot out there. I lost my mom to dementia. And that's a whole different form of grieving, because you start to grieve them when they're still alive, as you slowly lose them to the disease. I've been in an emotionally abusive marriage and got out of that. So, I've experienced that, and there's so much that goes on there, to that feel I could help women in the same situation. Um, I have a child who's neurodivergent. So I was a single mom raising him, and without a diagnosis. He wasn't diagnosed until he was older and out of the house. So,
Oh, geez.
didn't even know what I was doing. But
Mm.
like there's just so many things that all, and I'm sure this is most people's lives. We don't just have the one thing.
Hmm.
Um, I was in a long distance relationship during COVID and separated from my partner. Like there's just so many different things that I personally have experienced,
Right.
along with the depression, the anxiety, the suicidal ideation, um, that, I feel at this point in my life, looking back, I was given all of these traumas so that I have the experience myself to have the empathy and the compassion to be able to help people on a
Mm-hmm.
deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Going through it at the time, it certainly didn't feel like that. I was just like, can we
Yeah.
please stop? Like,
Yeah.
enough already.
Yeah.
But yeah.
In your course load in your studies, obviously psychology is, is predominant. Is Are there camps or people historically that you feel drawn to, like Adler or Jung or any of the people who kind of stand out in the public awareness of thought, schools of thought with therapy, with psychology? Is there anybody that you're just like you listen to what they do and you're like Carl Rogers or uh, William James, any of these guys that kind of like,
There is,
forged.
I took psych like, 30 years ago in my
Okay.
undergrad. So
Okay.
it's
Okay.
it's a long way off. So
Okay.
I'm gonna have to get my
Oh,
feet wet
okay.
again.
I wasn't sure if that was coming up in your current coursework though, if there
I'm
was
just
like,
applying. So
oh, okay. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay. I'm getting ahead of the game here.
You're
All
a
right.
little ahead of me,
Okay. I
but
thought
that's
if you were
okay.
like knee deep in courses and they're
Mm.
like bombarding you with all this stuff, I
I
was like,
do remember that Young was very interesting,
okay.
but
Okay.
that's
Okay.
all I remember.
All
And I'm
right.
sure there's a lot more, in the last 30 years that has come to the forefront in terms of, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. No,
new
there.
schools of thought and
Yeah, no, it's matured from the late 19th, early 20th century, which was very mechanistic and very not humanist at all. And yeah, and so like what was the guy that I mentioned? Carl Rogers is a humanistic psychologist, and he
Mhm.
at that time, like I think he was around in the 60s. He was very in touch with human emotion and human feeling, and not just looking at something as a person as a bag of chemicals, something,
Yeah.
and saying, well, blah 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 blah. We'll talk you out of this, but we're also going to get you loaded up with some serotonin thingies and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, that's what I kind of gravitate to, but that we're touching base with what we are, which is deeply complex and deeply emotional,
Yeah.
the whole system as it is. So anyway, but I'll have you back for another conversation, and if you do in your coursework, you can say,
Yeah.
this guy, I read something today, and we can check back in with that.
Yeah. Well, we can do that. Yeah. Hopefully in a year from now when
Oh,
I'm
cool.
when I'm knee deep.
Right, right. And then maybe
Yeah.
you'll be like, "Oh my God, my head's throbbing. I don't really." Yeah, so we'll
Yeah.
we'll see where you are if you
But
want to.
it's really interesting on that front that one of my majors in my undergrad, like I said, I graduated in 1994 and I majored in linguistics.
Oh,
And my son just graduated with his bachelor's in linguistics.
oh, neat.
And the stuff that he did now is so advanced and
Really?
so much more complicated
Wow.
than what I did. Like my whole degree probably fit into like one semester of like, his
Oh my
undergrad.
gosh.
It's just the leaps and bounds forward that they've made in in linguistics in the last couple of decades has just been amazing. So
Uh, oh, that's
I'm
neat.
I'm fairly excited about learning the same for psychology and
Oh yeah.
what the current thoughts are. And of course, we're so much more aware of trauma than we were a few decades ago. Like that wasn't even really like other than soldiers going off to war, they were the only people who like suffered trauma really back then. And now it's like, no, like we all do. I mean, maybe not everybody, but a
Hmm.
large chunk of us do. And it really influences who we are and how we develop and all of that, so how we raise our children. And the whole generational trauma, like we didn't know anything about all of that
Hmm.
20 years ago.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say for development, you can respond to this and let me know where you're coming from, but just a little opinion of mine is that adversity molds us, and adversity helps us navigate experience. We learn not, and I'm not talking strong adversity, but just daily tedious treachery of life, that kind of thing. But it has to be on a maybe a spectrum where you do have deep trauma on the one end and the Leave It to Beaver fantasy life over, or My Father Knows Best or whatever, all those gee whiz shows. And somewhere in there, depending on our character and our personality and whatever's going on inherently, that there is this sweet spot where you do have challenges and bad things happen, but
Yes.
all too often, especially as you said, generational trauma, the things spiral into they gravitate towards that more than anything. Um, and maybe there are cycles in humanity where we lean into that and we don't have so much of the gee whiz stuff. So it seems like that if we could frame it that way, that it's part of being alive, it's part of humaning, but there are spaces that we don't want to occupy in that spectrum. So I'll hand it back to you if you want, if that makes any sense to
No,
say
yeah,
that
yeah.
it's like your immune system. Like you have to catch colds, you have to, onboard things that, are not don't feel good, but then it builds you up a little bit to have
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
resilience.
you have to have certain fights and win them in order to grow and succeed
Hmm.
and move on to otherwise you're stuck. And being stuck is one of the most horrible feelings in the world. And I don't know who I saw somewhere, someone speaking or whatever it was, and they were like, if you're stuck, you're flatlined. And what is it when you're flatlined? You're dead.
Hmm.
So, like, we have to, as humans, be constantly striving for more and leveling up and having those little challenges, but we have to, succeed.
Hmm.
And we do that. And sometimes it's getting out of bed and taking a shower. And that's the challenge that we've succeeded at for the day. And other times it's, applying for a job that you didn't think you were qualified for and landing it.
Hmm.
It's any range of things from what seem very small wins to very big wins. But yeah, and for our kids, obviously, we have to allow them to do those things too. We can't be fighting their battles for them,
Yeah.
or they just don't know how to exist in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. They'll be ill-equipped when they do have to enter into the fray.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I never had kids, so I say that very cautiously. But I was a kid, and
Yeah.
you and I talked before, and childhood, taught me a lot. It gave
Yes.
me a little
Yes.
character, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I totally agree. But like I was saying, I think it can go too far, and that's when people break, and
Yes.
they need to ask for help at that point if they can't.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah. And it's not always about doing these things by ourselves.
right, right.
It's having someone there. In the ADHD world, there's a lot of talk about cloning.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just like if I could clone myself
Oh,
would be
right.
great. But
Yeah.
also just having or a body double, like just having somebody in the room with you sometimes makes it easier to do stuff. Like it's more fun to fold laundry if you have somebody to talk to,
Yeah.
right? Or it's more fun to clean your room or clean your house if there's somebody also, like if you're married or you live with somebody, if you're both cleaning the house, it's so much more invigorating and
Hmm.
and easier than if you're doing it by yourself.
Hmm.
So sometimes it's just like calling your friend and being like, "Hey, can you come over and sit with me while I wash the dishes?"
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not even so much of asking for help, like I need somebody to help me do the thing that I need to do. It's just having that moral support.
Hmm.
Or even being on FaceTime with somebody like that works too. They don't have to physically come to your house,
Right.
but
Right.
just having
Excuse me.
asking for help in that you're connecting with somebody because we don't do that enough.
Hmm.
And we're getting more and more isolated. Weirdly, the easier it is to connect with people, the more isolated we are.
Yeah. 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 There's a bizarro world as facet to that, or the
Yeah.
cost benefit, it's like that's one of my critiques of culture at large is we really need to maybe hit the brakes a little bit on what we've done with technology and with accessibility and the social mediums that are out there. Because, like you said, it's kind of like fast food for the psyche. It's like we want to take the best of it and the accessibility, but then also have a measure of am I getting that enrichment? Am I getting, like you said, that quality time with someone who I can socialize with and sit with? If that is indeed happening, then I say, yeah, green light, go. That's great. But if, like you said, and the Surgeon General in the United States said a few years ago, we're in a loneliness epidemic, and we have never been more connected. So again, where is the analysis of that and the assessment? And I don't judge because I, I mean, you look at you and I right now, we're going to go on social media platforms with this conversation. I'm all in, but like I said, going all in on something that's as complicated as what we're doing requires, I think, analysis by, minds that can, assess what's going on with that. So, and all of us can do that, but I mean,
Mhm.
just to aggregate that, uh, what's going on cost wise and benefit wise. So, yeah. But again, I
And
say
not
all that without,
only existing
yeah,
online.
yes, exactly.
I see it a lot with the Gen Z kids,
Yeah.
because they're so connected online, but then when they have to go out in the real world and talk to somebody in real life or even make a phone call where they're talking to somebody, they're so anxious about it because they don't have to most of the time. And it's just we need humans are social beings. We need to be connected in real life, and we need more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I fully agree. And I
So
say that as a 55-year-old. So but at the same time, I want Gen Z to succeed. I want them to be a
they are
good,
so amazing in
yeah,
so many ways.
yeah.
My kids are Gen Zs, so
Okay.
I'm
You're biased,
I'm
but that's no, I
I'm
agree.
biased.
No, I agree because they're so much smarter. It's like you said, your son graduated, and I'd say smarter and lots of caveats, but I mean just that they've been given, this is the upside to everything, is that they've been given access to so much information, and
Hmm.
so much ability to form knowledge about reality and what's going on. But like we've been touching on for the last few minutes, that it's in game theory, they call it Moloch's dilemma, where it's like you want something good that you got to have a sacrifice for it. And
Right.
so, yeah, some of that real time, fleshy interaction, the human interaction has been kind of cast aside for the immediacy, the fast food kind of socialization. And that is where my heart does go out to that and the younger millennials that they weren't, again, old guy here, I was exposed to first 20 something years of my life, there was
Yeah.
no social media, none of that. And so I was face to face, so I know that reality. But yeah, hopefully we course correct a little and
Yeah.
figure out as a culture that, we can have social gatherings, communitas and whatever that grounding is, in real human relation. And then we can have our cake to eat as well, that we are
Yes.
on whatever it is they're on now, Instagram or whatever. Again, being old, I'm on Facebook. So, but
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
they
this week it seems to be blue skies, so.
Oh yeah. I was thinking about that myself. If some of the people I follow on Twixter or whatever are there, I'll probably migrate over there. But a lot of people I still follow are on Twixter, so I don't know. I don't know where to go with that. So, and I originally got on Twixter or X or whatever it is to promote this show
Mhm.
and help it out, but it really hasn't. The only thing I get out of Twixter X or whatever it is right now is spam accounts sign up for me. And it's
Oh,
usually pictures of young, pretty girls, but they're
of
just,
course, of
they're
course.
just bots. But I'm like, no, no, no. So that's all I ever do on Twitter anymore is just beep, beep, just delete these fake accounts that are trying to build relevance. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, am I really? Is this quality time? So we'll
Well, and
see.
it's hard to know how many of these will stick around because there was Telegram for a while, and
Yeah.
then, everybody was on that, and then it kind of faded out. And, there's been various other things like Threads is a thing, but is it really a thing?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Uh-huh.
so we'll see.
I remember in the very early days that I got on the internet, and like at the turn of this century now, I guess, was chat rooms. You'd
Yes.
go to a
Yeah.
chat room, and a lot of times it was kind of sketch, but sometimes you could go to like I love plants and horticulture, so I'd go try to nerd on that, but that went fairly quickly when things consolidated into stuff
Yeah.
like Facebook and all that. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where things roll out into the future and what these younger generations do. Like boomers and my generation sort of developed all this, but what are the young are they going to course correct? Are they going to say, well, this really sucked, but this was good, so we're going to
Hmm.
take this and like maybe blue sky is a way, another stone in the path that you can walk on. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes of it. But yeah, I'm on the sidelines rooting for the young ones,
Yeah.
that they have a better life and that they can navigate this you
Yeah.
know this
I think they will,
reality.
and they're creative and they're motivated, and it's gotten to the point with them, like the poor millennials were that sort of generation, I think, that experienced the change, but were in it
Yeah.
too much.
Mm,
And now the Gen Zs can come up and be like, that whole way of life that you guys got set up is not working, so we're going to change it.
yeah.
We just need to wait for them to be able to be of age and
Yeah.
have the influence.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Because
but they will. They're going to do great things.
good, good. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I really am. And I said that about the millennials too. I was like, oh my gosh, especially for me, what I was seeing in the millennial, and we're going on a tangent here, but that's good, is that they were in the market system, they were getting away from the older model of, public trading on the markets,
Yeah.
and the worth of a company is determined by arbitrary emotional or greed or any of that. But they were doing more employee-owned businesses and taking stock in their even the lowest of their employees. And I've been a low employee for a long time, so I can say that. But yeah, that they took that model and shook it up a little bit, and they did crowdfunding instead of the stock market,
Mhm,
or
mhm.
that the C-suite people were fully aware that even if you were a semi-skilled worker, that you have some skin in the game, as they like to say, and that they were treated with some equality or egalitarian respect. And I like that. I like that because I just think that benefits everyone without
Yeah.
government interference. It's like they
Yeah.
are monitoring themselves and they're not again beholden to publicly traded systems like the stock exchange and NASDAQ and all that, New York Stock Exchange, all that stuff. So that was something I found exciting, and I don't know where that is right now. I don't know if it's evolving or getting better, but I hope the Z's pick up on that and say, oh yeah, people who are the new captains of industry out of that generation will say, yeah, I like this better because then, we are more autonomous and we have more flexibility, and we can nonetheless play the game that, capitalism plays. So yeah, that's another thing I'm curious to see because I just think everybody has a better shot at, quality of life and all that when it comes to
Yeah.
those kind of
Yeah.
decisions. That are more collectivist, but market system collectivist. So yeah,
Yes.
we'll see.
And
We'll
yeah,
see.
better quality of life
Yeah.
also leads to better mental health, better physical health,
Right, right.
that just health in general.
Yeah.
It's everything is connected.
Yeah. And the culture at large. And
Yeah.
not to, again, go on a preachy tirade, but it's just if you lowest employees are making a living wage, that they're spending and they feel good about themselves and they're not playing into a kind of trap of being not victimized, but taken advantage of. And
Yeah.
that resentment and cynicism can boil up out of that. So that, if there's that satisfaction that I'm making enough money to take care of my family and my spouse can raise the child, whoever the spouse can raise the family, and then they can get back into the workforce. So, all the it, and that's what we kind of always wax sentimental in America. It's like, gosh, gee, when in the 50s, mom stayed home and all or whatever the traditional thing was. But yeah, we can revision that with equity in mind uh,
Mhm.
for whomever decides, whatever. But that we can not have both parents working a job and a
And
half
still not being able to
and
pay the
not being
bills.
able to make it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. So anyway, that's something to look forward to. Hopefully we'll see some enthusiasm for a marketplace that can be more inclusive, I guess is the right way to say it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
egalitarian. So anyway, now that we solved that world problem, I want to dive into your podcast because we said we would talk about that. So let's do that. Let's open up the space for your podcast. And my last check, you were season 2, episode 26. You've had some really neat and amazing guests. And so let's open that up. And what are you doing in podcast world?
So, my podcast is called Phoenix Wisdom,
Link
and
below.
thank you.
Sorry. Yes.
Um, and it's a pretty simple podcast in theory.
Uh,
I have guests on every week, and they tell their own story about a time when they struggled with suicidal ideation, which could be anywhere from just, having a fleeting thought that, maybe I don't want to wake up tomorrow, to having like a concrete plan, time, means, everything all laid out. It runs the whole spectrum, right up to, some guests have attempted, um, but where they've been at their sort of deepest, darkest moments in life, but they decided to stay for whatever reason, and how they healed and grew and triumphed over that. And now they're doing amazing things in life and are so glad that they stayed. Um, and that's kind of it. Um, the premise for the podcast was basically, I've been there and nobody talks about it. And we had a young family friend in her early 20s who died by suicide 2 years ago.
okay.
And I didn't know what she was going through. And afterwards, I was like, well, had I known, I could have reached out to her.
Mm,
I could have been like, I've been where you are and I'm still here. How can I help you? And like had that real upfront conversation with her where she could have maybe, this is all theoretical, of course, but
yeah. Yeah.
it's so much easier to talk to somebody who's been there and felt it than not. Um, so basically the podcast is to stop the stigma around suicide and mental health.
Mhm.
Um, because the more we talk about it, the more we realize, oh, I'm not alone. It's not just me. There are people who have been here and they've gotten through it, and so can I. So
Mhm.
it's just, it's that glimmer of hope that I'm hoping to put out into the world where people can be like, oh, I'm, like I just said, I'm not alone. Other people have fought this battle and won. So maybe I can too.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me throw out another opinion or theory or whatever, and then I'll do something with it afterwards. But I think when we talk about being in that space, and you say ideation, and I think that's a good term that we can use for what I'm about to talk about, is that there are different species of being in that space. And
Mhm.
I think one of the most maybe, and I'm just pulling this out of thin air, and it could be hooey, but the most pervasive one is the chronic, long-term, we'll call it depression or what we'll bracket that. And then there's sort of acute tragedy that suddenly something occurs, and it's just so horrific that it's better just to check out and not do it. And then there's other things where that same flavor, but like it's a medical emergency, and you think, oh, I don't want to, endure what is about to, happen to me
Mhm. Mhm.
physically. So it could be an illness that comes up. You've been diagnosed with a death sentence disease or something like that. So I bracket these things out to say that when we are in that space of the chronic, long-term depression, severe depression. And I can speak to that because, and you and I have talked about this before, and we can talk about when you and I talked about this before, but that it in itself is, I think, the space that, like you said, lifting the stigma and making it more socially, not only an awareness, but just that it's perfectly fine to reach out for help, because it's almost like you're between a rock and a hard place when you're in that chronically depressed, suicidal, or self-destructive or nihilistic or whatever it is, that you don't dare speak of it, because we don't dare
Mhm.
speak of these things, because again, we all want to be in Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver, and the idealized, the contra idealization to the horror that we feel when we really just don't want to be anymore. So I'll throw all that back to you, but yeah, I think like in that space rather of the life, years long struggle,
Mhm.
that making it socially not just acceptable, but just easy, facilitated, more abundantly, or however that is. So what do you think about that? What are your thoughts when you talked about taking the stigma off? What can we do as a culture to make that an easier ask uh,
Yeah.
for the
Well,
person
there's
who's in that space?
there's a lot. Part of the struggle is that due to the nature of the disease of depression
Hmm.
itself,
Hmm.
you know, we are lacking nobody, we tell ourselves these stories. Nobody wants to hear what I'm going through. I'm just a burden. Nobody's going to understand. And we tell ourselves all these stories that prevent us from. But then even once we get past that, it's about telling the right person. And, that's also what this is attempting to accomplish
Hmm.
is to change. There's so many old-fashioned notions. I mean, suicide used to be a sin.
Yeah, yeah.
It used to be illegal. I'm not like sure how that
You're going to
worked.
jail. Yeah, right, right.
Right.
Yeah,
But
time
I
out for
guess
you.
I guess
Yeah,
if you survived an attempt, then
yeah,
you would be
which
arrested.
which is just what they need, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really gonna help
Yeah.
everything. Um, and there's still the thoughts that, oh, they're just doing it for attention. There's all these like
Right.
terrible old-fashioned
Gaslighting.
notions out there.
Right.
And really all it is that people have given up hope that this life can ever be better. Not even like fulfilling and contented, just
Livable.
tolerable,
Livable. Yeah.
livable.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, finding somebody who can understand that and talking to them. And that's one of the reasons I did this as a podcast is so that they can hear these stories without actually having to reach out to anybody.
Yeah.
They can sit at home alone in the dark and listen to these stories of hope.
Hmm.
And then maybe they can reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
But, I'm hoping that the podcast is like the first step when they're feeling hopeless, but don't have the wherewithal to be able to actually have a conversation with somebody. At least they can have these stories coming at them. And then they can be like, okay, there's a lot of people out there who have been through this. And I had no idea when I started this podcast, like a year and a half ago, how it would go. I didn't do any market research or anything. I was just like, let's just go.
Hmm.
Am I going to be able to find a different guest every week? And, here I'm a year and a half in. I've got episodes pre-recorded a couple months out. Like
Mm.
it's it's going. And people are coming to me being, can I share my story? Everybody who has come on has been like, thank you so much for doing this podcast. Like, I'm so grateful to be able to share my story and give hope to those who are suffering. Like, they're in it just for me.
Mm.
Sometimes they also have, books to promote or, something else. But those also go to help the people who are listening, and everybody gets through this differently. Everybody heals in different ways. Everybody chooses different modalities to help themselves because we're all different human beings and we
Right.
need different things at different times. So it's just like hearing the multitude of options that people have. There's no like, you have to go to therapy, you have to go on meds, you have to, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to do anything. You can do whatever feels good to you and whatever works for you.
Right. Right.
Maybe that's Reiki for some people. Maybe
Hmm.
that's journaling or, whatever. Or in combination, do all the things, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, and it's just about, yeah, people being willing to have these conversations. And also, so many of my guests come on and they're like, I've never told this to anybody before.
Mm. Mm. That's
So,
awesome. That's really awesome. Because as we were saying earlier, um, when you were t giving us a little background bio, that you have been through it and survived and flourished as a result of the reflection on that and metacognizing on it or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
self-reflection, that is such a tremendous gift, to again then pass on to someone else, or at least demonstrably but passively say, it's possible. It is possible. It is something that can be done. And
Mhm.
and I had a flash. I don't know. We don't have to do this, but I'm almost thinking of time stamping right now, for the recording that's going to be on YouTube. What could we say to someone who's maybe drawn to this conversation? What could we say right now if somebody's in crisis? What would I'll have a couple words, but what would you say to somebody who's, really, really in that dark space? What would you say?
I mean, if they're really, really in a space and thinking of doing harm for themselves, please reach out to the crisis text line at 988 in the US. There are different numbers in Canada and different countries. But they are real people. So I volunteered there, and everyone thinks we're bots, and we are not bots. We are actual people who are talking to you, and we're there to listen and help you through what you're going through. So if you don't have anyone in your life, if you don't have friends or family members or guidance counselors at school or whoever, therapists that you can talk to, clergy, like there are so many people in that are sort of set up in our communities for this, but if you don't feel you can talk to them, there are strangers waiting to help you. And you can call them, you can text them if you want to have a conversation, you can do that. If you'd rather text, you can do that. So that's the first thing I would say for somebody who's like in it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and otherwise, if you're just sort of on the edge where you know that it's dark and not hopeful, yeah, find somebody, one of those many people that I listed, whether it's a good friend or somebody in your community who's there to help you.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, part of this is my turn for a little tangent, but part of the trouble with telling people is that there's fear of repercussion, because for some, there's still these old-fashioned ideas like you can't be a productive worker if you're that level of depressed. Well, of course you can,
Yeah.
or you can't be a good parent. You can't do all these other things. You can. You can have do all the things. Um, and it's not your mental health. It does not take away from the person that you are and who you are in the world.
Hmm.
So we need to get rid of those stigmas and not be punished even further for what we're going through and what we've gone through.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you for that. And I I guess the only amendment that I would add is I'll draw from something you said earlier about ADHD, and I'm very hyperactive, so I'm probably in that camp. Never been diagnosed. I was diagnosed as a dyslexic, and I don't know if there's crossover there, but
Yeah,
anyway.
that falls under the neurodivergent umbrella.
Yeah, yeah. So, but again, hyperactive my whole life. In fact, I'm 55 and I'm like still a spaz. So I'll probably take that to my grave. But anyway, what I would amend is that something you said earlier, struck out to me, and we're talking about the clone. And so, if you're not in crisis, but you're in that space, the dark space, and you've been there, I've been there, so I'm okay with talking to this and not just pontificating. That in your mind's eye, in your imagination. And for me, the imagination is 99.9% of being. The functioning cognitive psychological person. I think, we have to imagine our reality. We have to imagine the metaphors that we use to communicate with each other. So I think the imaginal and the imagination in relation are deeply powerful. So bear with me on that bizarre word tangent there. But imagine the idealized you. And it's not going to be easy because, again, I know the hamster wheel. I know the cyclical, negative self-talk and just the heavy cloud. But if you could day by day by day develop that other you, that idealized you, that the you that is the future perhaps, or just side by side with you right now, that embodies or characterizes what you can at the space that you're in imagine to be um, whatever it is you want it to be, that's not struggling with the shadow and with what the narrative is currently. So if that's possible, and it may not work for some people, but if it is a tool that you can develop and it's not that you want to split into multiple personalities or anything like that, it's just that you are building this character, and you by rights, you can inherit that character once you feel like, my gosh, this is such an admirable, who is this person, and say to yourself, because I mean, I do that a little bit. I'm like, oh, what would the smart Justin do? Or what would the, really
Right.
creative Justin do, And so I launch myself out of my current where I am to try to embody that and say, can I embody that person, that archetypal role of creative or, intelligent in a diverse way, So anyway, if that helps anybody, that's the only amendment I would put on there, other than compassion and love, and to say that, in you, indwelling within you is all of that, which is why I'm
Mhm.
coaxing the imagination to say, well,
Yes.
I understand the stuckness, I understand the hamster wheel, and that it's not easy, and it's very thick and very difficult. But then a habit that you can develop is that cultivation of the possibility
Yeah.
of that
If
that
you can
the other.
imagine it, you can be it.
Yes, yes, yes. So I offer that as a tool that has helped me to imagine a future self. I think, in fact, when we talked, I had a brain injury wherein I was deeply limited for a short period of a few years, but that I always imagined myself as having emerging from that and being regaining what I once was, or better. And so that was a means that helped me move through. But so I'll close that out, and to go back to your podcast. Do you have like a highlight reel, or is there one story you want to share from like you? I thought it was awesome that you said some people had just said, like, I've never talked about this before,
Mhm.
and you created that space for them to do that. So, do you have an interesting standout that you like to share from your guests?
No.
I mean, they're
There
all
are
they're
too
all your
many.
children. I get that, but I
Exactly.
mean,
Yeah.
just something like, while we have the attention of somebody who's maybe in a space right now, that you could direct them to that episode as a starting place. Let's frame it that way, rather than your favorite child. I mean, what's a place for someone to start in your podcast that you would be like, oh yeah, this might be the guest that you could, or yeah, I don't know if that's a good question, because again,
Um,
how do you choose?
how do you choose exactly?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll say two things. So
Okay.
one, there is an episode in the first season somewhere that's me. It's my husband interviewing me
I listened
about
to that one. Yes. Okay.
the podcast, why I started it,
Yeah.
all of my story, a little bit, like all of that. So if
Mhm.
you want to, learn more about me and the podcast itself, that's a place to start.
Okay.
Um, and the the top episode on my analytics um is and has been since almost the day it came out, has been Rebecca Baines's story about being a survivor of a satanic cult,
Oh, okay.
which I think gets a lot of attention just because it's
Sensational. Yeah.
not something most people go through.
No, no, that's very standout. Yeah, very unique.
Yeah. And then
Um,
another one for women, especially, but also men need to know about women's health, is on PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoria something.
okay. That's a good start, because women will know. Yeah. They'll
Yeah,
be like,
yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
basically, like her hormones make her suicidal every month.
Oh my God, really? Wow.
Yeah. And this
Wow.
is this is a thing, and it's because it's a like a syndrome, it's like a collection of symptoms. It's really hard to diagnose, and there's not a lot of literature, and of course most of the medical stuff is about men.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of research into women's health. So it's not it doesn't get the exposure, and a lot of people don't even know it exists. So hers is a really informational and very important topic
Nice.
because I don't know how many other women are out there, being suicidal every month
Ah,
and not knowing why or what's going on, and they think it's them, and I mean, it's not. It's not their fault. So that's also a really important one.
mm, mm. Wow. Wow.
So
I'm just trying to process that,
yeah,
and
like there's
you
just
know
so
it's
many
coming.
stories that I've heard that are just like you would never think that these things happen to people, and they do.
Mm, mm, mm.
So I'm learning a lot just by hosting the podcast.
Oh, I'm sure. And again, if your goal and aspiration is to be a therapist or a clinician in this regard, in the psycho-emotional domain, wow, what better equipping of yourself could you ask for, right? Is
Yeah.
to build this library of anecdotes. And I think it was Ray Wolfinger. I love this quote, and I pull it out when I can. Said the plural of anecdote is data, and with
Hmm.
caveats. But yeah, when you compile or aggregate these stories that are consistent, repeatability, reliability, that you're getting evidence, you're seeing demonstrable evidence that this is a real phenomena. It's not just hyperbole. It's not just, histrionics or whatever you want to call it. It is indeed, and we already know this sort of superficially, but to know maybe some of the wiring under the board by people's insights, by saying, this was my hack. This is what helped me to extricate myself. It's like the thing I just did with the other you kind of thing. I mean, if somebody, and that's just me pulling it out of thin air, but if people have these lived experiences of resilience and anti-fragility or whatever it is that they
Hmm.
did to or healing, love, compassion, light, all that kind of stuff, that man, that's just good medicine, really
Yeah.
good medicine. So um, what I'd like to do is we are creeping up on an hour, and I do this sometimes with my guests, especially when we're doing this kind of topic or field that we're exploring, is let's go back to Imagineering for a minute for you and say what are you designing as your future, the future, Janet, over the next maybe few years, and not just you personally, but I mean, where do you want where do you want your course to take you with regard to this project, to the work that you're doing? What are you imagining for yourself if you have these sessions where you try to see what am I going to be doing in 6 months to 5 years or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, the podcast I think is going to keep going.
Hmm.
But I would obviously love to see it grow and reach more people and have um bigger guests, I guess.
Mm.
Because that in itself would help it grow. Um and there, Lord knows, there's enough celebrities out there who have also,
Yeah.
gone through
Yeah.
their moments
Hmm.
and stuff. That's a lot of the reason why actors are actors is because
Yeah.
that's what got them through their trauma.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just continued growth and exposure so we can help more people.
Mm. Mm.
And then of course, my own personal goals to get accepted to grad school, to do the study, get through it, and be out there in the trenches. Perhaps literally, I don't know. We'll see.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Speaking on all of this, be it on podcasts or conventions or whatever, about the reality of suicidal ideation and the lived experience that so many people are going through, and really just getting rid of that stigma. And of course, like I said before, how it influences things like job life and insurance benefits and things like that. Like, oh, nobody can find out because I might be punished
Yeah.
for it in
Yeah.
some way, right?
Blacklisted.
Like, we
Yeah.
got to get rid of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the same, like if you can't get insurance if you have a pre-existing condition, those are the people that need it, like
Yeah. Yeah.
the people who need the help should not be punished for saying that they need the help.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
That's so
that's my
sensible.
soapbox.
Yeah, but it's so sensible. Come
I
on.
know.
How do we weave that into our fabric? There's a way, and it's going to be subversive, I'm afraid. But but pro-socially subversive, not, chaos and pandemonium. But which leads me to a question, like in on your website, which I do want to talk about. Uh, you talk about being a cinephile, and you talk about the arts and creativity. Um, hmm, as a medium, and that's a very broad, sort of broad strokes here, but can you imagine you employing or engaging with documentary or written, not necessarily a full published book, but just some sort of other medium that will be a compendium or a tool in your toolbox to help you with projecting this message and the work you're doing and projecting, let's face it, it's branding. You have to brand yourself. You have to be
Yes.
recognizable to build the consensual loop, etc. So have you flirted with the ideas of jumping out and doing something artistic or weaving that into the work somehow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hmm.
The thoughts and ideas are there, putting things into practice is a whole nother thing. But,
Yes, 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 yes. I
but
I
yeah,
agree.
I hadn't actually thought about a documentary, but that would be super cool.
Talk about a
Um,
way. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, like, there's those anthology books
Uh-huh.
where like everybody sort of writes a chapter.
Yeah.
So something like that, but that's basically also a documentary in written form. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, I thought about the book version, but hadn't thought about the movie
Hmm.
version.
Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
cool.
I think so because again, and we'll bring our millennial and Gen Z friends back in, that's the medium now, and
Yeah,
and that's
on video.
yeah, that's something very accessible, and hopefully it doesn't have to be done like TikTok where you only have 30-second sound bites, but that you can do a short film that for them would be long form, but if you do maybe a two-part series that are 25, 30 minutes each, and it's very digestible, very accessible, and I know I'm going to be psychic for a moment that if you are Gen Z and all you know is TikTok, that if you really get drawn into it and it's of worth to you, that you'll sit through that excruciating 20 or 25 minutes. Like old folks like me, I can watch 3-hour movies and be like, that was great. But yeah, and I'm being cynical here, but I mean, that
Yeah,
you can produce that and it will be palatable to all of us, from 75, 80-year-olds all the way down to 20-year-olds or 18-year-olds,
yeah,
that can be had and consumed by all. So, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm hoping you can do that because I say that because I'm sure there are documentaries revolving around the topic of self-harm, of suicidal ideation, and the actual carrying out of the act of dispatching yourself. And I'm sorry to say that in a very mechanistic way, but I mean just that you can present it in a way that, like you said, sheds the stigma and makes it just like everything else. I mean, it is death, and we do that too with just natural old age or accidents or things like that. That it's just, and I get it. It's horrifying. It's existentially in your face, so to speak. That you don't want to confront it, and it's best not to speak to it or about it or whatever. But really, there are some cultures wherein death is less of a horrific kind of idea that it's accepted. And I think we're good about it in the West, but I think we could do,
hmm
a little better with the narratives. And I think religion, not to get on my soapbox, but I think religion has made it more difficult because we're afraid of what's on the other side. And,
hmm
if we could move towards that idea that first of all, nobody gets out of here, as Jim Morrison said, nobody gets out of here without dying. And so it's common experience. It's the one thing other than having a pulse that we all
Yeah,
will work with, and taking that fear out, I think, as well as now that's just death in general, but then the stigma of having the
yeah,
audacity to say, well, I'm done, and I'm not going to be here anymore.
yeah.
So
And like any emotion, the more you shove it down and stuff it down and don't talk about it, the bigger the beast it's going to be. And then at some point, you're not going to be able to contain it and things are going to go haywire.
yeah,
Um, and then you're going to feel all of it all at once.
yeah, yeah,
And we like to avoid that. That doesn't need to happen.
yeah. And you mentioned Carl Jung earlier. I mean, he talked about the shadow and doing the shadow work, bringing the shadow out, and that genre of ideas, the death and the dying and the suffering and the disappearance of you is part of what the constituency of the shadow. And so, yeah, we that's one thing I would criticize the West is that we don't do our shadow work nearly
Yeah.
enough to be in
Yes.
relation with it, and so anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
that.
we could go on a whole tangent about toxic positivity here, but
Right, right, right. And like you said, suppressing the darkness.
yeah.
And not to sound weird, but I embrace it. I totally bring it out for myself. And I joke with people, sometimes I'll listen to death metal, like really violent, scary, horrifying music, and I just get in there and I feel the anger and I feel the rage, but it's safely confined in that space. And then
Mhm.
when the song's over, I'm like, that's cathartic. I feel
It
really good.
really
And I'm not
is.
going to go butcher somebody because some song was preaching about weird,
Yeah.
scary stuff. But that's my little tool. But if you go out with a ball bat and hit a dead tree, do whatever you have to do.
Sledgehammer on a tractor tire is really good too.
Yeah, just don't let it hit you back in the head. But yeah, 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 beat
Yes.
that tire. Yeah, yeah. There's so many methods. And wouldn't that be neat if we had like communal, like whatever it is, like scream and
There
good,
are some
good,
places
good, good. Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
rage rooms
yeah.
that you can go and, throw paint at the wall and break glass and,
Yeah.
baseball bat a television set and like
Yeah.
all kinds of
All that
stuff.
good stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, it sounds counterintuitive, like, oh, that's antisocial and it's destructive. And it's like, yes, yes. And you're venting it out of your system. It's pressure release.
But we're humans. We need to get it out.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All right. So let's talk about your website, and then I'll bring us in for a landing, and we'll have some finishing thoughts. But share with us, and again, for the audience, the links will all be down below for everything that we've covered so far that's linkable will be down in the description field. But yeah, tell us about what's on your website, and I know you have a Facebook page, and I know you have a coaching service, so please share that.
Yeah, so my website is just my name, janetsandberg.com, Sandberg, like iceberg, but made of sand.
I like that.
Janetsandberg.com. And yeah, there you can find out more about the podcast, about Reiki, about coaching that I do. I also have a Facebook group for the podcast that I've recently started, just as a community for people who either were on the podcast or listen to the podcast to find that place of support with other people who know what they're going through,
Hmm, hmm.
where we can talk about it and or not, or just, hang out and have a little glimmer of positivity in your day by popping
Yeah,
over there.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
called the Phoenix Wisdom Empowerment Circle
Okay.
on
And if it's
Facebook.
if it's okay with you, I'll put a link there because you'll
Yeah, that would be
you'll
great.
bring them in. Yeah. Okay. So if this is a portal, that's good.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the page, and so I'll get the link and put it down in the field in the notes, show notes or description field or whatever that is. Cool. All right. Let's do this. Let's ask. I will. Let's see. I'm already making my. But no. Let me ask you about a final thought or something that you want to leave the audience with in this session in this conversation and we were kind of laughing in a year or so we'll definitely let's bring you back and when you're in studies or whatever it is whenever the timing's right but for now how do you want to what do you want to share with the audience before we wrap it up.
Um, yeah, I think the the thread that has run through sort of every conversation that we've had in the last hour has been, find people you can talk to. There's no need to be lonely. There are people who understand what you're going through. You're not a burden. Um, you need and deserve support as a human being, let alone a human being who has struggles with mental health or physical health or emotional health or whatever. Um, it's okay. Everybody struggles. And we get through it, you'll get through it.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And if you don't mind my chiming in just a little bit, I would say to the audience, especially if folks are here in that space, that for me, big caveat, big asterisk here when I say this, for me in my own life, I don't pursue happiness. If it happens, that's great. But the myth in the West, I think, is happiness, and especially on the hedonic end of happiness. So to the audience, if there's somebody here who's like, I'm horrible, I'm a monster, I'm all these things, it's like take that out of the equation. That we're not happiness machines necessarily.
Yeah.
Happiness is external and it interacts with you, but you don't have to be inherently happy all the time or even any
It's
time.
impossible.
Impossible. Now to use a fancy word, there's eudaimonic happiness, which I call well-being or
Mhm.
being satisfied with life. And that to me, that steady state of just I'm happy in that sense. Like I'm content with my life. Life provides for me, or the universe, or however you want to frame it, provides for me what I can use and what you know, I can't even put it into words, but just if anybody's there concerned about the fact that they're not happy, it's a very fragile word. It's a very complicated word.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'll leave on that note. Just to if any like because I keep imagining if there's somebody listening to this conversation who's you know in that space that you and
Yeah.
I have both occupied, and we can continue to occupy if it comes up, and that's good too. Just to know it's a part of who we are. And anyway, Janet, thank you so much for this conversation. May it have a blessed life on the internet. Out there in the YouTube world and Spotify world. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing. I have your back in this. I support
Yeah.
you, etherically, of course, just that doing this work, we are allied in that sense that all I want in my leaving an imprint in this world is that, and I can be a jerk sometimes, so I'm not saying this like I'm some saint, but that I do my best before I die to be a helpful person.
Yeah.
That's what I aspire to, and I see that in you, and I see you doing that, and I see you being
Thank you.
successful in that. So I wish that for you. I see that for you, and yeah, it will be. So thank
Thanks.
you.
Always a pleasure
Thank you.
chatting with you.
Oh, well, and to reveal to the audience, I had been a guest on your show and I appreciate it. I listened to the conversation and I was like, wow, that's cool. I always like listening back because you get insights out of yourself that you didn't even
Yeah, right.
yeah, it's like, did I say? Oh, really? Okay, okay. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll even include that link, not to self-glorify, but that
Oh,
maybe
of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that if the audience wants to, indulge themselves in that, they can do that. So, but again, Janet, I really appreciate it, and let's consider having you back. All my guests are always welcome back. I've never had a bad guest experience. Like, oh, I'll bring that person back. But yeah, absolutely. Let's keep that door open, and to the audience, again, there will be lots of information down below in the description field whenever we handle a sensitive subject like this. As I said in the beginning, we will have the resources there, the helplines will be available and so forth. But much love to you guys. Thank you to my subscribers for being there. I appreciate it. So, Janet, may you be well and have a good weekend. We're recording on a Friday, so I'll wish you a good weekend. I'll also say
Thanks,
goodbye to
you
you
too.
after we stop recording. And again, YouTube audience, thank you guys so much for your time. Appreciate it. So if I can just find the button to stop the recording, they change this for. Oh, here it is. Oh, how sweet of them. Okay, here we go.